Hello, distinguished guests, partners, supporters, and friends. Welcome to the Computer History Museum 2021 Fellow Awards. I'm Marguerite Gong Hancock, Vice President of Innovation here at CHM. It's wonderful to have each of you here for this special Backstage event. Since 1987, the CHM Fellow Awards have honored remarkable pioneers in computing. A special welcome to all of our fellows from over the years who have joined us this evening. We're excited to kick off this evening with an insider event with all of you. Now, here is CHM President and CEO, Dan'l Lewin.
Thank you, Marguerite. It's wonderful to see everyone backstage at our virtual CHM Fellow Awards. I've seen a lot of familiar faces and supporters, and I'm also excited to see new and welcome many new partners. I'm joining you live from our virtual stage in Mountain View, California. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm so grateful to our CHM community, our core donors, trustees, staff, and volunteers who advance our mission every day with their passion and support. We're really thrilled to honor 2021 fellow Ray Ozzie. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Dan'l. It's great to be here. You know, I really appreciate what you've done to put this together. I cannot believe how much work this has been for the people who are on staff. Thanks, Marguerite. Thanks to everyone. It was a lot of fun doing the oral history, and I look forward to tonight.
No, we are too. Hi, Ray.
Hi.
You know, I want to start by remembering when we met in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I was at Next. We had just started the company, and you just formed Iris Associates. And you were beginning to design what would become Lotus Notes. And then we connected again after you started Groove, which was a really exciting moment in your life and in general. And then you came to Microsoft, where I'd been for a few years. And then who would imagine that here we are 20 years later, sitting down and having this conversation on this very special occasion.
Yep.
So the theme for tonight's program are inspired by your life's work and impact. They are build and tech for collaboration. So as we begin, I want to ask a question of you. How did you discover your passion for technology, for collaboration and communication? And since you've worked on so many products and companies in this rapidly changing industry and the different business environments, can you tell us a little bit more about the way you think about change?
Great questions. The story of how I got a passion for communication collaboration is probably longer than we have time for. I was very fortunate that in college I got exposed to a system called Plato, which I know people at the Computer Museum are very familiar with, but it's not generally broadly known. But in the late 60s and early and mid 70s, those of us who had exposure to this system, which was a computer-based teaching system, got a chance to get a little peek of what the internet would become with respect to online gaming, online discussion, online community, collaboration, and so on. I had a particularly impactful moment because I was a developer working on a project and was assigned to work for someone remotely, which was not all that unusual on that system. Completed the project, and the guy was a very lousy typist, very eloquent in his emails, but very lousy in chat. And after the project was over, I went to his home for a party, and I was kind of shocked because this gentleman was a quadriplegic, and the reason he typed so badly was he had a stick in his mouth. Right. And it's one of those things that, oh, you didn't know? But it left this indelible impression on me that what we were doing, communicating using the computer as a communication tool, there was something special about it that could get past, that was different and in a way, some ways worse, some ways better than interacting face to face. And here we are doing it in a completely different way.
Yeah,
in terms of change, you know, the industry has many technologies that progressively move along, and what I think a number of other leaders in the industry do is to kind of try to map out where these things are going, overlay them in the future, and then pick a future time, 5 years, 8 years, and sort of say, if there wasn't an evolution of technology that got there, if technology began that day, what would the world look like? Because what tends to make people not think that broadly is that they're thinking in incremental terms. But if you can dream what something will be like at an endpoint in the future, as though that were the first day with those technologies, I think your brain goes into a different mode.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's take a look back now at your roots. I think you were employee number 29 at Software Arts. May have been one of your first quote unquote real jobs. You were working on breakthrough products at the time, a little computer program for spreadsheets known as VisiCalc. And then you had your experience working on TK Solver. So what was your experience like at Software Arts?
You know, this was the first time I worked for someone else's startup. You know, I had done a little startup in college, but this was an amazing experience for me. Dan Bricklin and Bob Frankston, who founded the startup and wrote VisiCalc, were brilliant. But one of the things that was amazing is they ran the company as a family. It just felt as though everyone cared about each other. There was no infighting. We were all on the same page, all going the same direction. And it had some of the downsides also. You felt when things were great, we all celebrated. When Dan and Bob felt a little pain because of maybe the relationship with our publisher or something, we all, you know, felt it also. But again, it was just a wonderful place. And Dan and Bob also were very generous in introductions and stuff. It was during that era that I met Bill Gates and Paul Allen, because we dealt with MS-DOS. You know, Gary Kildall, you know, Steve Jobs and his team, you know, Mike Boich, Joanna Hoffman, you know, Andy. It was just a wonderful experience, and the industry was very small at the time, so it was just a very positive experience.
Yeah, well, we've got a message for you right now from the Software Arts co-founder and Alpha Corporation CTO, also a CHM fellow, Dan Bricklin.
Thanks, Dan'l. Hey, Ray. As a fellow, it's so good to have you joining the group. I was talking to Bob Frankston the other day about it, and he remembered interviewing you for Software Arts back in the early 1980s. He asked you something about remote procedure calls to watch your thought process. Little do you know, the remote coordination was a major part of your DNA, as the next 40 years have shown. Of course, you passed the interview, and the two of you became quite a pair of techies. You went from the huge network of Plato to mini computers at Data General to the new IBM PC with us. Here you are, obviously a star programmer, but you worked diligently implementing the IBM PC version of the bytecode interpreter for our high-level implementation language. Nothing flashy to show off to your friends and family like the user interface, but it was a solid foundation that was key to us delivering our products. Now, for the rest of you, here's something I've come to realize about Ray. He gets into the messy details without compromise. When he encounters hard problems, he solves the hard problems instead of taking a watered-down, simpler approach that doesn't scale. I've seen that over and over again. Building a solid foundation is what he does. When he built what became Lotus Notes in the late 1980s, it was asynchronous distributed computing, and it had public key encryption and very high-level security built in as part of the design. It wasn't just a simple proof of concept, but a robust enterprise-grade system. And he did an innovative business deal with Lotus to ensure that it happened. In the early 1990s at Slate Corporation, we used Notes to run a distributed company. And it was so great to even do work in an airplane with no connectivity. And you just sync up when you got to a land connection on the ground. To this day, some new feature will show up in a product and be touted as a breakthrough. And invariably, you'll hear from an old timer, well, Notes had that. Ray is driven to not only build things, but also to build a complete shipping product and a company or organization around it. Ray has also been a major catalyst for the Massachusetts technology community. While at IBM Lotus, He worked hard to engage IBM's R&D groups with the Massachusetts development community. IBM hadn't previously had much of a development presence here. At Microsoft, working with others, he helped to do the same, resulting in the beloved Microsoft New England R&D Center in the heart of Cambridge's Kendall Square, the Microsoft Nerd Center. Finally, an observation of mine. When we came out with new software like the spreadsheet, we had to get new users to buy hardware they didn't already have. Even when I started writing early iPad software, I had to buy my testers and designers hardware. This was a major impediment to adoption. The success of Notes resulted in the installation of thousands and thousands of PCs connected to LANs that were actually used daily by management, and they were on many desks in many large corporations. Starting to use the web and intranets was merely just adding some new software. The hardware was already on the desk, the wires were in the walls, and the high-speed telco lines were connected. The users already knew being connected online was good. I see Notes as a catalyst to the rapid adoption of the web and internet as we know it. Congratulations on a well-deserved honor, Ray.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Ray, anything you'd like to add about those days and your time with Dan?
Oh, they were just terrific. I mean, sometimes you can plan things. I was very fortunate to have been born at a time when this industry, was taking off, and I've met a lot of. I've been able to be mentored by a number of just amazing people, and Dan and Bob were two of the. They're one of a kind, but there are two of them.
Yeah,
but tremendous.
Yeah, what a lucky moment. So let's shift gears for a moment and talk about your passion for building teams and organizations and companies. I think Dan referenced that quite well. Can you talk a little bit about your role as an entrepreneur or company builder? And Safecast and Groove Networks come to mind. I'm not sure people know too much about Safecast, but I'd like you to give us a little update on your thinking about those organizations.
Most everything I have done in my career, I have worked for commercial enterprises, and the largest startup that I did that was independent of a large company was Groove. Groove was a great learning experience for me. It was the first time I had to build not just the technology, but the go-to-market. Unlike in the Lotus situation where they did the go-to-market, this was a huge learning experience for me. The product was wonderful. We did not have a commercial success. Ultimately, Microsoft ended up buying it and used the technologies for SharePoint, and that's great. And all the people went to Microsoft, and that was great. But what differentiates Safecast, not many people probably know about it, but 10 years ago, there was a tsunami in Japan, and there were meltdowns as a side effect of that tsunami. And a number of tech people and non-tech people who knew each other just wanted to know what we could do to help. And so we met out there, and essentially what we decided was that the biggest thing that we could do is measure and open data. So we built using standard IoT technologies, what Chris Anderson would call the peace dividend of the smartphone wars. You could just and we assembled these things, went out through the exclusion zone, measured radiation, and published it. And here we are, 10 years later. It's probably the world's largest open citizen science data set. Radiation now moving into air monitoring. I'm a director of that volunteer organization, and my new company is not in the citizen science world. We are building it's Blues Wireless. We're building infrastructure as a service, little devices that if a manufacturer embeds it in their product, you can disseminate that product worldwide to your customers and get transparent feedback about what problems the customers are having with it or how you might be able to serve them better. But Safecast is using it for air quality monitoring, and we have created a version of that. It's a cellular module that has all of the cellular that you need embedded in it, so you don't have to get a subscription. And they made an air quality monitor that you can put on the outside of your window, and that's all you have to do. It reports and shows you what the air quality is like on a day-to-day basis. I'm just very excited about it.
No, it's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about that transition from building companies to landing at that little company known as Microsoft. I mean, moving from your nonprofit world to the for-profit world. So, how did that come about with Groove? I obviously had met you when you had started the company, and I was working with the venture community. But then I'd been there for a few years, and then one day you showed up. So, how did that happen? Tell us that story.
Yeah, Groove was a great product. Those who were there, this was the Napster time, in the evolution of the internet. It wasn't as clear at that point in time that centralized systems were going to be the things that took over, and certain things that we just take for granted right now, like sharing your contact information, on a central service, or a company putting all of its customer records and CRM into some other company's system on the internet. It wasn't as obvious that was going to be the direction. And so what we did was, I believe in innovation and collaboration. We built a small team collaboration system that was built on technologies that are very similar to blockchain. It was a system for distributed consensus among devices without servers. And it was a wonderful little system, and it was particularly embraced by the public sector, both nonprofits and NGOs and government organizations responding to disasters and so on. But we had 250 employees, and we took a lot of capital, $140 million of capital, and it wasn't on a path to being a unicorn. So Microsoft, who was one of our investors, bought the company, gave everybody jobs, and I ended up splitting my time between Seattle and Boston with my wife, and became one of Microsoft's CTOs. Eventually, some months later, Bill let us know of his potential plans of going off to work on the foundation with Melinda. And so he asked Craig Mundy and I to more or less split his role. I took the chief software architect role, which is more of an inwardly facing transformation and change role. Craig took the outward facing role, sort of ministerial duties all around the world, that part of what Bill did. But I'm indebted for that opportunity because it was the first time I had been selling systems to companies to orchestrate their own change management, becoming distributed companies and so on.
Right.
And this gave me an opportunity to understand what change management was really all about.
Yeah, it was an incredible time. And for those who don't know, Ray wrote a memo on the way into the company, and then 5+ years roughly later when he left, that sort of summarized his worldview on the internet and the state of services at the time. And by the way, you mentioned Craig. I think Craig's here tonight in the program, so you'll get to say hello to him. Now, let's move on and now hear some stories from one of your colleagues at Microsoft, who's now the corporate vice president over AI and research, and that's Lili Cheng. Let's hear from Lili.
That's great.
Thanks, Dan'l. Congratulations, Ray. I thought I'd share with you all a few stories about Ray. One story actually started right here in the Computer History Museum. In 2010, we were here for the 50th anniversary of Plato. So, that was a long time ago. And I remember we were listening to Don Bitzer up on stage talking about Plato, and Ray kind of poked me in the arm and he said, this is where it all began. It was the first collaboration software, the first network computers, so many firsts. The first, they built these games that people could play, multiplayer games, education software, first bulletin boards where students were talking. And of course, that was also very controversial because students talking in the University of Illinois for a government-funded project during Watergate meant that Don Bitzer's funding, he was really building something that was new, that was very, very controversial with the government. So he was shielding his team from, a lot of criticism that he was getting. And, that was new information for Ray at the time. So I just love how Ray always honors that history and was amazed that he was really there, in the very beginning of so many parts. My second story is really our time together, which we spent a lot of time working when Ray was at Microsoft. And I'm just so grateful. I can't imagine Microsoft without our cloud, Microsoft Azure, and the big workloads that helped companies bring all their software to the cloud, Office 365, all of your communications. And again, this was like an idea that seemed so obvious, and Ray is always so great at looking at the big picture and the foundation and just going for the center. And sometimes the biggest innovations are those things in the center that so many people don't do because they think someone else is doing it, or it might be too challenging, or it might be too difficult. And I'm just grateful for what you did for Microsoft, and how much that changed the culture and all products and customers, and just how much I learned doing that. Maybe my last story is something very personal. I used to really love the early internet culture, which I still do. But it was, at the time, people thought it was crazy people building social software, talking about ham sandwiches and their cats. And they weren't serious computer scientists. They were kind of slackers. And so I loved these people, and I probably was one of them. And we built a conference around people in academia who were information scientists, bloggers, and also a lot of the early startups. And I invited Ray. He had just started at Microsoft, and I wasn't sure if he was going to come because he was really busy. And I was just so touched that he showed up. He showed up early, sat in the back, had this big smile on his face. And, everyone was just so amazed that this, figure, this person that we had really learned so much from, was just sitting there hanging out. And we were trying to get him to give a talk. And he was like, no, I don't want to give a talk. So people just sort of picked up their chairs because they're very outgoing, and they circled him and just kind of did a spontaneous vote with your feet. And it was just perfect. And I think that it's not a surprise or, just an odd coincidence that Ray, given his character, his willingness to listen, and the way he builds teams and the way he builds products and thinks about communication and lives communication, it's not a surprise that, you're really innovated so much, because I think that character and that spirit is so obvious in every product that you built, and really shaped so much collaboration that, we've just come to believe as, obvious and given today out in the world. So thank you so much for how much you taught me, and thank you so much just for, everything you've done. Thanks.
Thank you, Lili.
Yeah, Lili, thank you. What a testament. That's
That was great.
so well said and perfect. Ray, anything you'd like to add based upon your time or in response to Lili's comments?
No, just one of the most wonderful things that I never really understood when I got into this business at the beginning was, I'm a technologist, and I would focus on technology, but the people are just incredible. The people that you learn from, the people that you're exposed to, you have the opportunity to pay it forward, and you watch them pay it forward. It's just, it's wonderful to see the wave after wave of innovation and personalities over time. But
yeah, it's an inspiration for sure. Now we're going to transition a bit into the final part of this conversation, a little bit of a look back and a little bit of a look ahead. And I'm going to pose what is a really hard question to you, and that is that when you reflect on your career and the impact you've had so far, what are you most proud of?
There was one period in the evolution of Lotus Notes that gave me a better feeling than I've ever had, and that was, it's hard to go back into that era, but in that time, one company, Novell, and Lotus were both, we both had early network products, and we both sold them through channels of distribution. And both companies had for about every dollar that we sold of product, the channel sold $8 or $9, and it was $1 billion business for us. So that, there were 8 or 9 billion, maybe 10 billion of aggregate value in the ecosystem. But I had never understood this ecosystem, and we would have this conference, Lotus Sphere, and these people would come up and say, "You don't understand how you changed my life. You're putting my kids through school. Right. I met my spouse over here. He or she was a customer, and now the number of lives that you touch from an economic perspective, and have the ability to see it and witness what happens. That was just so incredibly rewarding. The same thing, of course, happens with employees. If you build companies and you see that progression. But to me, the most rewarding thing is not the technology. It's just how I might have been able to improve someone else's life in a funny kind of indirect way, and it's very gratifying.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, you mentioned a little bit about Blues Wireless, your new company, and I know you love the blues, so I'm sure that's where the name comes from.
Yeah.
You gave a nice description. I've taken a look at the details behind it. I'm going to ask you a question now relative to your excitement about the future. And I'm guessing that it might be tied into your belief system and what you're working on today with Blues. But let's talk a little bit about the future and weave in, your level of excitement. What do you see the possibilities to be in the future?
Yeah, very concretely, of course, I am extremely excited about this new company and the opportunity. I've been working on it for about 3 years. For probably 8 years now, many in the industry have been projecting that IoT was just going to explode, and it hasn't exploded. It's taken a while, but I kind of believe, like Masa-san, that there are going to be 1 trillion IoT devices out there embedded in most everything, and ignore for just a moment the creepy surveillance aspect of IoT. There are ways, like many technologies, you can misuse it, but just take what Safecast is doing. There is no better way. We've never had an opportunity to monitor the environment, to understand. Maybe we could have prevented Flint if we had been doing water monitoring all the way at the edge in people's homes. Maybe beaches could be safe. Maybe we would know what rivers, we'd know where the major polluters are, what neighborhoods they are affecting more than others. And that same thing crosses over to the commercial realm. We are in a service-oriented era. That was what the whole transformation at Microsoft was about. It's everything as a service. And there are people who have propane tanks and different types of assets and supply chains that are being moved around. All of these things can help give people more visibility into what's going on, and I think it's going to end up being fundamentally transformational in customer service. Beyond Blues, though, I'll just say one thing, and the biggest thing I'm optimistic about is, I don't know if you remember, but just a minute ago I was saying, you kind of predict the future by overlaying these charts of where things are going up and to the right. This is a discontinuity. The pandemic was a discontinuity. Mm-hmm. Wars create discontinuities. This pandemic is, and that completely changes the game. This fundamentally accelerated how fundamental changes in how we work, the financial system, many things, healthcare, the way, now we're going to probably use mRNA in lots of different ways. There are so many things that are now going to be discontinuous because of this. And so the really successful entrepreneurs are right now trying to look at the landscape and go, okay, what assumptions were we making that are just blown up? And 5 years from now, how does that change the landscape?
Yeah. No, it's fascinating when you think about it, because it wasn't too long ago, for the most part, within a reasonable lifetime, people were the computers, right? And then we invented these things, these microprocessors and other things. And now, as they fade into the woodwork, how they are employed in service to the greater good is really key. And that to me is really this exciting moment for us in the industry and for us at CHM to be able to celebrate, the insights that people like you bring to the table, given the trajectory and the arc of your contributions, which are so immense and fundamental, frankly. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk with you about this. And as we think forward, I want to thank you again on behalf of everyone, because one of the things that you're going to allow us to do right now is to take a private tour of some of your collection, because we're not able to do that at the Computer History Museum today, but we're going to go into Ray's house for a little minute. So
There you go.
let's take a little look.
This is probably my most interesting asset. It is an original Plato terminal. University of Illinois gifted it, and it's unlike many that are out there. It is a complete Plato terminal, and it's in great condition. This plasma panel, which normally it's orange dots. The touch panel is working. You've got rows of LEDs and photodiodes. The microfiche projector in it is present. I'm not sure if that's completely working. In the closet, I have a tank of compressed air that can operate it, but essentially here is the microfiche. The vision was a multimedia terminal, although they didn't use those words, and that means audio visual, and that's the visual part. This is the audio part. So that was a French geography lesson. This is the audio disc that would go along with that lesson. This was the computer that I used when I co-wrote Lotus Symphony with Barry Spencer and Matt Stern. This was, the whole symphony effort was 250,000 lines of assembly language done from first line of code until ship in 9 months. Such a memorable device. The TRS-80 Model 100, this was a writing machine. You could be on this wasn't a communicator. I mean, maybe some people use it that way, but what I would do is, if I had to fly 6 hours somewhere, I would just take this and I could write a spec, or I could, write a proposal, you could focus it. It was just several lines, and the keyboard, just like that grid. There's an amazing similarity between that clack, and the grids, clack. I love the feel of those things. We were under NDA with Microsoft, and both at Software Arts and at Iris, where I did Lotus Notes with Tim and Len, and we had source code so that we could either make changes, send it back, report bugs, do whatever we needed to do, and Bill was extremely empathic about what it was like to be a developer without doc. And so here's the DOS 2 sources, DOS 3 sources. Here's the Windows, from 85 Windows kernel user GDI, supplemental, tools, sources. This is a VisiCalc for the IBM PC, Lotus 123. I'll say this binder is so memorable to me. Microsoft let us have the source code, and this essentially a listing of kernel, GDI and user, with all of our scribblings of the bugs that we found and fixed, so that whenever you'd run into a problem, you'd run over and look at the binder to see if, hey, has Tim already found this, or has Len, already fixed this one? This was more or less GitHub for our changes. So I just thought this was great.
Well, Ray, what an incredible collection. Thank you for sharing that. It rivals the museum. You've got some things there that are really quite incredible. And you are drawing on my memory, I'll take a moment and pause. Early 1982, I visited the University of Illinois campus, and I visited Don's lab, and I saw that orange glow in those early plasma displays. They were a little bit like room heaters, as everybody knows, or anyone who's had a plasma display. But it was the beginning, and it was an incredible moment for anyone who's thought about computing and how it should amplify human potential. And your story is just gelling and fundamental to, I think, so many people's worldview of what computing can do in service to the human condition. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for keeping that terminal and that display alive. That's one of the things that we don't do at the museum. You've done a wonderful thing by sharing that with all of us tonight. So again, we can't thank you enough. So to help make the program possible, this 2021 Fellows Awards series, I'm here tonight to thank Accenture as our headline sponsor. We're going to hear from them in the main stage in a little while, but for 8 years, Accenture has supported this important program and helped to share the stories of our remarkable fellows. And I'd also like to thank our education sponsor, the KLA Foundation, and their support for the 2021 Fellow Awards. It's an incredible opportunity, again, for us to thank our sponsors. We couldn't do it without your support. Now it's time for us to move to the main stage, where we will be joined by well over 1,000 others who will join us for this award ceremony and the full program.